My husband laughed when I tripped outside the courthouse. We had just exited mediation, where my termination letter and empty bank account had been paraded like shameful trophies. Before I continue narrating the story of Ava, please consider giving this video a like, share it, and subscribe to the channel. He offered me his hand, not to help me up, but to pat my shoulder like I was a child who didn't know how the world worked. "Come on, Ava," he said. "You were never built for the pressure." Then he turned to his lawyer and smirked, already moving on. 3 months earlier, I had still been Ava Penrose, CTO of Synexus Data Labs and co-founder in name only. My husband, Ethan Penrose, made sure I had the title and none of the power. He was the face, the pitchman, the man in tailored suits who networked with VCs and said things like agile synergy without irony. I was the architect of our tech, the one who coded through pregnancy nausea and postpartum fog, who built the product from a basement server and an old MacBook. But when the Series C funding came through, my login credentials mysteriously stopped working. "Security protocols," Ethan said with a shrug when I asked. "Too many cooks in the kitchen," he added, waving me off like an intern. I told myself it was temporary, that I still held equity, still had a voice, still had the power of the intellectual property we'd filed together. But the moment I asked for access to the books, he started sending lawyers to speak on his behalf. By the time the board voted me out, they had already been told I was a liability. He held a dinner party the night I was officially removed. I remember the wine he opened, a Syrah from Napa that we'd been saving for our anniversary. He toasted to new beginnings while I sat across from him, barely tasting the roast chicken on my plate. Our toddler, Lily, sat between us, smashing mashed potatoes with a plastic spoon, blissfully unaware. The guests laughed, and Ethan grinned like a man who had just won something no one else understood. It wasn't always like this, of course. Ethan used to bring me coffee in bed and ask for my thoughts on database architecture. We built Synexus in the early days on shared insomnia and ramen, coding side by side until sunrise. He said we were partners, two halves of a whole, but the truth is, he always wanted to be the one in the spotlight. When Forbes listed him in their 30 under 30, I was credited only as his wife, also in tech. That winter, I moved into the guest room and told Lily we were camping. I slept on the futon surrounded by boxes of old hard drives and notebooks filled with diagrams and equations. Some nights I stared at the ceiling, trying to remember when I stopped being a person and started being a prop in Ethan's origin story. He controlled the narrative, the brand, the story we told investors and friends, and eventually even ourselves. But there was one part of the story he didn't know. During my doctoral research at Caltech, I had filed a provisional patent for an adaptive predictive modeling algorithm. It was experimental then, just a theory wrapped in code, but I believed in it. After I joined Ethan to co-found Synexus, I shelved it, thinking we'd build something together with shared vision. But I kept the patent active, renewing it quietly under my maiden name, Ava R. Langston. I paid the maintenance fees from a separate account, one Ethan didn't have access to. The algorithm was built to learn autonomously from sparse datasets, adjusting its own learning rate in real time. It could revolutionize healthcare diagnostics, fraud detection, climate modeling, anything involving complex variables and incomplete data. Ethan never asked what I worked on late at night, assuming I was scrolling forums or doing mommy blog stuff. In truth, I was perfecting a technology so advanced it scared even me sometimes. When I tested it on open-source datasets, the results broke benchmarks. After the board ousted me, I cried in the car for exactly 7 minutes. Then I drove to a co-working space on the edge of town and bought a hot desk membership under a fake LLC name. There, between other people's Zoom calls and startup pitches, I began finalizing the version of my algorithm that would change everything. I didn't want revenge. I wanted separation. I didn't want to destroy Ethan. I wanted to become unreachable. Ethan's arrogance made my invisibility easy. He stopped asking where I went during the day, assuming I was wallowing. He left spreadsheets open on his laptop, email previews from his new assistant, Mila, popping up with increasingly personal messages. I noticed how often he scheduled late client dinners and how quickly he showered when he returned. At some point, I stopped counting the lies and started counting the days. The offer came from Soterra Health Analytics, a San Diego firm working on predictive medicine. They'd seen a demo I'd uploaded under a pseudonym Langston R and tracked me down through encrypted email. When they asked for a video call, I hesitated for exactly 1 hour before saying yes. I presented the model with trembling hands, knowing this moment would alter the trajectory of my life. They made their opening offer before I'd even finished the call. I asked for time to think. The number they proposed was already absurd, 8 figures starting with a 1. But I knew what the algorithm was worth and what it would be worth in 5 years. So I called a contact from Caltech's patent law clinic and arranged for a consultation under NDA. Within 72 hours, Soterra doubled their offer. $112 million. That was the final number, agreed upon by both parties after a week of negotiation and technical due diligence. The acquisition would be handled through a silent trust to protect anonymity and reduce liability. My name would not appear in press releases, investor updates, or the public-facing transaction log. To the world, I was still the ex-CTO who got fired and faded into obscurity. Ethan had just finalized our divorce the week before the wire hit. He let me keep Lily's bedroom furniture and the 10-year-old Toyota. The house, the equity in Synexus, the brokerage account, all his. He said I lacked the stomach for high-stakes ventures, and in exchange for a quick resolution, I didn't argue. I signed the papers while wearing the same hoodie I wore the day he asked me to leave the board. The first thing I bought after the wire cleared wasn't a car or a condo. It was a new laptop. I picked it up in person, paid cash, and registered the account to my middle name, Rena. My old MacBook had served me well, but it was full of ghosts. Photos of happier days, folders Ethan had named, reminders of a version of me that no longer existed. This new machine was sleek, fast, and untouched by our history. I carried it home in a plain black bag and didn't tell a soul it existed. My new apartment was a 1-bedroom walk-up above a bakery that started clanging at 4 a.m. every day. The ceilings were low, the heating uneven, and the bathroom window stuck halfway open year-round. But I loved it. The smell of sourdough in the mornings and the faint thud of the baker's music gave me comfort. It felt like starting over in a place that didn't expect anything from me. Lily stayed with me on weekends, her curls bouncing as she ran up the stairs 2 at a time. She was 4, full of questions, and believed my small apartment was a secret clubhouse for brave girls. Ethan never visited or asked what the space looked like, assuming I'd traded comfort for pity. He once joked that she'd outgrow the charm of her mother's sad little hideout. I smiled and said nothing, letting him believe his version of things. My lawyer, Simone, reviewed the divorce decree again when I told her about the sale. She was one of the few people who knew the truth, and even she took a moment to process the magnitude. "You played this perfectly," she said, flipping through her annotated copy of the filings. "He has no legal claim, no future leverage, no idea." I nodded, but I didn't feel victorious, just unburdened. The money went into a structure I had built months in advance, anticipating a future Ethan wouldn't be part of. Langston Holdings, an innocuous-sounding name registered in Delaware, funneled the capital into a mix of trusts, private equity, and municipal bonds. I worked with a female-led wealth firm that specialized in asset protection for women in STEM. Every email was encrypted, every phone call pre-scheduled with 2-factor authentication. If Ethan ever came sniffing, he'd find nothing but shadows. 3 weeks after the acquisition closed, the press caught wind of the technology. The headlines were vague, praising Soterra's revolutionary leap in machine learning diagnostics. TechCrunch speculated that the innovation came from a small European firm. No one mentioned me. That anonymity was part of the price, and I paid it gladly. Still, the buzz reached Synexus faster than I expected. Ethan posted a LinkedIn article titled, "Innovation is a team sport," that reeked of performative humility. In it, he praised open-minded leadership and knowing when to pivot, like he'd invented collaboration itself. He made no mention of our divorce, my firing, or the fact that he had once called my code academic gibberish. His applause for bold new thinkers read like a eulogy to the woman he thought I used to be. A week later, Mila sent me an email. It arrived in my personal inbox, the one she shouldn't have known existed. The subject line read, "From one woman to another." Inside was a single line of text. He's trying to claim it was his. Attached was a screenshot of an internal memo where Ethan called the algorithm a seed from Synexus, early IP efforts. I stared at the screen, my hands ice cold, despite the radiator hissing at full blast. This wasn't just ego, it was theft. Ethan knew he couldn't legally touch the patent, but that didn't stop him from reshaping the story for his own benefit. If he couldn't own it, he'd pretend to have inspired it. That was always his trick. Revision, not reinvention. Simone advised silence. "Let him puff up," she said. "No one outside that bubble takes internal memos seriously." I wanted to believe her, but Mila's screenshot unsettled me. There was something in the way Ethan phrased things. Vague enough to avoid legal recourse, specific enough to cause doubt. The implication was insidious, that maybe I hadn't done it alone. At the bakery below, they started selling raspberry tarts with little edible gold flakes. Lily loved them, said they were princess food, and insisted we eat them in our pajamas. On Sunday night, as she nibbled her tart and watched cartoons on mute, I sat across from her with my laptop open. I logged into an old Slack channel I hadn't touched in over a year, the one from Synexus, earliest days. There it was, time-stamped and clear. My code, my notes, my commits. The earliest commits were all me. Ethan hadn't touched the repository until 6 months in, and even then, his contributions were mostly markdown files for pitch decks. I exported everything to a secure drive and backed it up to an encrypted cloud. Proof didn't matter yet, but it might, and I wanted to be ready. I didn't go to Synexus' annual innovation gala that February. I hadn't been invited, of course, but that didn't stop Mila from sending pictures. There was Ethan, center stage, champagne in hand, Mila on one side, his new VP of strategy on the other. The caption read, "To new ideas, new allies, and bold pivots." He looked like a man who had everything he wanted. That night, I went for a walk in the snow. The streets were quiet, the sidewalks glazed with ice, and my breath came out in short clouds. I walked past our old neighborhood, past the coffee shop where we'd once written Synexus, first pitch deck on napkins. The window glowed with yellow light, people laughing inside, warm and far away. I kept walking. By the time I got home, there was a voicemail waiting from Simone. "Hey," she said, her voice tighter than usual. "Got a call from a reporter at The Verge. They're looking into the origins of the Soterra acquisition. They mentioned your name." My stomach dropped. I called back immediately, fingers trembling slightly as I hit redial. Simone answered on the first ring. "They're not publishing anything yet," she said. "But the reporter, Dina Kerr, has questions. She says someone sent her an anonymous tip claiming Soterra stole the core tech from Synexus." I closed my eyes. Of course Ethan wouldn't let it go. Simone told me to stay calm, but my mind had already begun assembling worst-case scenarios. False claims, public humiliation, a long legal battle where Ethan framed himself as the visionary and me as the bitter ex. I'd seen this before. Men positioning women as unstable, emotional, too fragile to own their own success. It wasn't just about the algorithm now. It was about the story Ethan wanted to rewrite with me, erased from it entirely. Dina Kerr's voicemail was professional but pointed. "Dr. Langston, I'd appreciate a few minutes of your time to clarify a recent anonymous submission regarding intellectual property origins. Given your connection to Synexus and the recent Soterra acquisition, we want to ensure accuracy." She didn't say it directly, but I could hear it in her voice. She was circling a story someone had baited her into pursuing, and Ethan's fingerprints were all over it. I scheduled a call the next morning, not because I had to, but because silence would imply guilt. Simone joined the call, her voice steady and her legal disclaimers airtight. I let her handle the formalities while I watched the snow melt outside my window. When Dina finally asked if the algorithm had any connection to Synexus, I spoke clearly. "No. The code predates the company, the marriage, and any agreement with Synexus." "I can prove that." There was a pause, just long enough to register doubt being replaced with curiosity. I offered to send Dina the provisional patent filing, time-stamped emails from Caltech's tech transfer office, and version-controlled code with dates that went back 5 years. She didn't say thank you right away. She asked if I was okay being quoted directly. Simone cut in, "Only with prior approval. Otherwise, this conversation is background only." After the call, I sat still for several minutes, hands folded in my lap, the tension buzzing in my limbs like electricity. I had the truth, the receipts, the documentation, but truth alone doesn't always win, especially when the lie is more comfortable, more flattering, more aligned with the power structures that shaped the people around Ethan. Men like Ethan didn't need proof. They had credibility. That night I couldn't sleep, so I opened Mila's last email again. The subject still stung. He's trying to claim it was his. I hadn't responded at the time, unsure if her message was guilt or warning, but now I wrote back with a single sentence. "Do you want to meet for coffee?" Her reply came 2 minutes later. "Name the place." We met at an old bookstore cafe in Somerville, where every table had mismatched chairs and shelves leaned slightly left. Mila wore no makeup, a beanie pulled low over her ears, and a scarf that looked hand-knit. She looked younger than I remembered, or maybe just less polished without Ethan around. We sat in the corner booth, each with a mug of something too hot to drink. She was the first to speak. "He made me write the memo," she said, eyes on the foam in her mug. "I wanted to push back, but he said if I didn't draft it, he'd find someone who would." She passed me her phone, showing a photo of the original doc with Ethan's edits in the margins. Red circles around terms like inspired by early Synexus work and internal conceptual foundations. He hadn't just implied ownership. He had planned how to spin it legally. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. Mila exhaled through her nose, setting the phone down between us. "Because I saw what you built. I know he didn't touch a line of that code." She leaned in closer. "And because I think he's going to sue." I didn't react. I sipped my drink, nodded slowly, and asked, "Is he that desperate?" "He's not worried about the money," she said. "He's worried about being irrelevant. This thing you built, it's not just profitable. It's going to make Synexus obsolete." Back home, I sent the memo screenshot to Simone with a note. "We need to get ahead of this." She called back immediately, more serious than I'd ever heard her. "This is textbook defamation prep," she said. "If he sues, it won't be about winning. It'll be about creating just enough noise to muddy the waters and claim you violated your non-compete." I pulled open a drawer, retrieved the original employment agreement, and began scanning. "No non-compete clause," I said. "He had it removed before Series A to attract more talent." Simone whistled through her teeth. "Then he has nothing but ego." Still, she drafted a preemptive cease and desist letter, addressed to both Ethan and Synexus, General Counsel. It was measured, professional, and backed by a mountain of documentation. If he wanted war, he'd have to walk into it wearing paper shoes. 2 days later, the story broke. Not in The Verge, but in a lesser blog that had picked up the scent without vetting the source. The headline read, "Did Synexus plant the seeds of Soterra's breakthrough?" The body of the article was thin on evidence, heavy on speculation, and full of unattributed quotes. But the damage was done. My phone lit up with messages, some from former colleagues, some from Caltech, some from strangers in tech forums. Most were supportive, a few were passive-aggressively concerned, and one simply read, "Stay loud." Soterra called an emergency meeting that afternoon. They were furious, not at me, but at the insinuation that they had acquired stolen tech. I assured them the documentation was airtight and offered to provide the full paper trail. "Let us handle the press," their VP of Communications said. "But we may need to issue a statement about the origin." I agreed on one condition, that my full name be used, no pseudonym, no obfuscation. Ava Langston, inventor. I was done hiding. If Ethan wanted to play games with public perception, I would meet him in the daylight. The official press release went live at 9 a.m. sharp. Soterra Health Analytics acquires predictive diagnostic model from Dr. Ava Langston. It was brief but specific, listing the patent number, acquisition date, and a quote from Soterra's CEO praising the algorithm as a landmark advancement in adaptive AI. My name, previously scrubbed from the public story, now headlined the innovation. The timing wasn't accidental. We knew Ethan would see it before his morning espresso. He didn't respond directly, but his next move came fast and predictably. An email from Synexus, legal team, landed in Simone's inbox by noon. It wasn't a lawsuit, not yet, but a formal inquiry into the development timeline and potential overlap of intellectual property. It was posturing, an attempt to intimidate, to rattle, to make me flinch first. Simone called it a tantrum in letterhead. I expected a storm from Ethan, but what came next caught me off guard. Mila texted a photo of Synexus, Slack announcements channel. Ethan had stepped aside to explore personal opportunities. The post was flooded with reactions. Some supportive, others suspicious, most vague. The kind of corporate goodbye you get when the board wants you gone but won't say it aloud. The caption under the photo read simply, "A new chapter." I sat with that for a long time, staring at my phone, wondering what it meant. Had the board pushed him out to limit liability, or had he jumped, thinking he could land somewhere else before the fall crushed him? Either way, he was out of power for the first time since Synexus had become a real company. And somehow, I didn't feel triumphant, just alert. Lily asked if Daddy was coming to her school play next week. We were sitting on the floor of my apartment, gluing paper stars to cardboard wings. I said I didn't know, which wasn't a lie. Ethan hadn't texted in a week, not about the play, not about Lily, not about anything. She nodded solemnly, then added another layer of glitter glue without a word. That night, I checked his LinkedIn. The title was gone. No CEO, no founder, no board advisor. His bio had been reduced to a single line, exploring new ventures. Even the background photo was blank, as if he'd erased everything that connected him to his empire. The comments under his last post were filled with awkward well wishes and vague encouragements. Mila reached out again, this time with an invitation. "I'm leaving Synexus," she wrote. "Want to get lunch?" We met at a ramen shop where no one wore suits, and the walls were covered in Polaroids of customers slurping noodles. She looked lighter, more tired, maybe, but less tightly coiled. She ordered spicy miso and didn't hesitate before speaking. "He lost the board 2 weeks ago," she said. "They saw the Soterra valuation and realized how much he'd underestimated you." She stirred her broth slowly, like she was thinking through every word. He tried to spin it like he inspired the algorithm, but the paper trail was too clean. I didn't smile, but I let out a long breath. "What's next for you?" I asked. "Starting over," she replied. "Somewhere smaller, somewhere real." She hesitated, then added, "I'm sorry I helped him push you out." I nodded, unsure if I forgave her, but certain she needed to say it. We finished lunch in silence. The next day, I received a certified letter from Ethan. Not from lawyers, directly from him, his handwriting on the envelope. Inside was a single page, unlined, written in blue ink. It wasn't an apology exactly, but something like it. "You were always more than I could manage," he wrote. He didn't ask for money or a second chance. He didn't mention the algorithm or the press or the board vote. Just a list of things he remembered. Me sketching models on napkins the first time the prototype worked, the way Lily had kicked during late-night debugging sessions. It read like someone trying to make peace with a ghost. I folded the letter once and placed it in the back of a drawer. 2 weeks later, I stood in the back row of Lily's preschool auditorium, watching her flap paper wings and sing off-key about the moon. Ethan was not there. There was no message, no excuse, no apology for his absence. Lily didn't ask again. She just hugged me hard after the performance and said, "Did you see me sparkle?" I told her yes. I saw it all. The tech press moved on quickly. New funding rounds, IPOs, AI scandals that made better headlines than my redemption arc. But the people who mattered remembered. I received 3 offers to join advisory boards at women-led tech startups within a month. One VC firm asked me to consult on founder alignment and internal IP strategy. I accepted the last offer, a quiet little company developing accessible medical diagnostics for underserved communities. My money sat in its trust, compounding quietly. untouched except for small distributions to charities and scholarships. I didn't need a mansion or a sports car or a press tour. I wanted stability, space, and the option to walk away if I chose. I'd already proven what I needed to prove. Everything else was just decoration. On a quiet Saturday morning, Lily curled up beside me on the couch. We watched an old animated movie she loved, the one with the stubborn girl who saves her village. "Is she like you?" Lily asked, pointing at the screen. I paused, then nodded. "Maybe," I said, "but you're even braver." I didn't respond to Ethan's letter. There was nothing more to say, no door left to open. He had built his castle on the backs of other people's ideas, and when the tide rolled in, it washed away the sand. I had built something quieter, something stronger, something with a foundation. It didn't sparkle on the outside, but it would last. 2 months passed before I heard Ethan's name again. It came from a news alert buried beneath stories about crypto fraud and a scandal at a logistics startup. The headline was clinical: "Former Synexus CEO under investigation for financial misconduct." At first, I assumed it was unrelated, some procedural audit from his exit package. But then I saw Mila's name mentioned as a cooperating witness. Simone forwarded the article with a note. "Told you he'd self-destruct." It turned out that during his last year at Synexus, Ethan had rerouted funds from R&D budgets into unreported consultancy payments. The payments had gone to shell companies linked to a friend of his from business school, supposedly for strategic advice. The board had quietly launched an internal review after his departure, but once Soterra went public about the algorithm, the scrutiny intensified. He hadn't just tried to steal credit, he'd been siphoning capital. The irony hit hard and bitter. Ethan had spent months undermining my competence, suggesting I was too soft, too academic, too idealistic to understand the stakes. Yet he was the one who couldn't resist skimming off the top while preaching discipline. He was the kind of man who thought boldness meant cutting corners. And now the corners were cutting back. I didn't celebrate. There was no champagne, no revenge playlist, no text to Simone that said "I told you so." Instead, I took Lily to the zoo that weekend, just the two of us, bundled up against the early spring chill. She wanted to see the sea otters and feed the goats, and I let her. Every time she laughed, it reminded me what winning actually looked like. Back home, I made mac and cheese from scratch and helped her build a spaceship out of couch cushions. She pretended I was the mission control officer and gave me orders in her serious astronaut voice. Between flights to Neptune and emergency marshmallow drops, I checked my phone once. Mila had sent a one-word message. Confirmed. I didn't ask for details. I didn't need them. That night, after Lily fell asleep curled around her favorite stuffed dragon, I stood by my bedroom window watching the street lamps flicker on. The city was quiet, the bakery below already shuttered for the night. In my inbox sat 3 invitations to speak at Women in Tech panels, all referencing the Soterra story. I declined 2 and agreed to 1, the smallest of the 3, hosted by a community college an hour outside the city. They didn't offer money, just gratitude and free parking. When I arrived, the auditorium was barely half full. Most of the audience looked under 20, students in hoodies and oversized backpacks, notebooks already open. There were no photographers, no panel moderators, just a professor who introduced me by name and stepped aside. I told them about failure, not the dramatic kind, but the slow erosion of being ignored, minimized, and finally erased. I watched as heads nodded and pens moved faster. Afterward, one student came up to me. Tiny braids, glasses, hoodie that said "debugging myself." "I'm building something," she said quietly. "It doesn't make sense to anyone yet, but I know it works." I gave her my email and said to send it when she was ready. Her hands shook when she thanked me. Mine didn't. The next day, I opened a new savings account under the name Langston Forward Fund. It was a shell at first, just an idea with a title and a mission: to fund projects led by women in early-stage tech. No application process, no pitch decks, just trust and capital for those building quietly like I had. I started with $1 million. Simone called it radically unorthodox, but helped me register the structure anyway. I thought about telling Ethan, not out of spite, but as a final, full stop at the end of our story. But I didn't. The man who told me failure was in my blood didn't deserve a single drop of the legacy I was building. He could keep his story. I had rewritten mine. A week later, I bumped into Marcus outside a coffee shop near MIT. He looked thinner, more tired, less smug than I remembered. He greeted me like we were old friends, trying to recover a thread I had long since cut. We stood in awkward conversation for a few minutes while he made small talk about industry trends. Then he lowered his voice and said, "He really didn't see it coming, you know." I didn't ask who he was. We both knew. "Did you?" I asked instead. Marcus hesitated, then shook his head. "No, but I should have." He offered to buy me a drink sometime to talk about what's next, as if I needed his insight or approval. I smiled and declined politely. There was a time when I'd have taken that meeting, hoping to stay visible in their world. Now, I had no interest in being seen by people who only looked at me when it suited them. I walked away without turning back. The Langston Forward Fund made its first grant the following month, $75,000, to a group of 3 undergraduates building a decentralized, privacy-first health record system. I visited their basement workspace, brought donuts, and asked questions no one else had asked them yet. They showed me their prototype with shaking hands and big dreams. I told them it wasn't just good, it was necessary. Later that evening, I passed by Synexus headquarters on my way home. The lights were on, but the building felt dimmer than I remembered. The new CEO's name glowed under the glass, unfamiliar and temporary. I stood across the street for a minute, not with longing or hate, but with detachment. This place no longer had anything to offer me. Not fear, not validation, not even memory. Back in my apartment, Lily was building a cardboard robot. She told me it was programmed to protect dreams and stop bad ideas. I laughed and said that sounded like a patent-worthy invention. She looked up at me seriously and said, "We should keep it secret, just in case." I nodded, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. Smart girl. Before I narrate what happens next, kindly let me know if you have any questions so far, and why you haven't subscribed yet. The cardboard robot sat on our kitchen counter for weeks. Its arms were made from toilet paper rolls, and its face had googly eyes. Lily insisted were emotion sensors. She named it Sparky and told everyone it was our family's new CTO. When I laughed, she said seriously, "It's smarter than Daddy ever was." I didn't correct her. Lily's words weren't rooted in bitterness, just observation. She was old enough to notice when someone didn't show up. Ethan had missed her birthday, a spring recital, and now the first parent-teacher conference of the semester. He hadn't called or explained, just gone quiet, retreating further since the investigation news. Lily didn't ask for him anymore. I sometimes wondered if Ethan thought of us at all. If he saw Lily's drawings on the fridge, or the patent news in the tech headlines and felt something. But that kind of speculation had stopped serving me. His silence was no longer confusing. It was consistent. I had just spent too long expecting sound from a broken speaker. My life had become smaller but richer. Afternoons were filled with peanut butter sandwiches, glitter accidents, and long walks to the library. Evenings brought investor calls and Langston Fund approvals, reviewed after Lily went to bed. I learned to compartmentalize with surgical precision. One moment I was discussing Series A strategy, the next I was gluing sequins onto a construction paper unicorn. The fund's second grantee was a mother-daughter duo developing speech recognition tools for children with developmental delays. Their prototype had been built in a garage, using salvaged parts and free APIs. What they lacked in polish, they made up for in clarity of purpose. When I told them we were funding them, the mother cried on Zoom and whispered, "No one's ever bet on us before." I told her, "Then they've been betting wrong." The fund stayed anonymous in the press. By design, I didn't want headlines or photos or think pieces about quiet power. I wanted impact without the ego trail. So the checks came from Langston Forward, and I remained a line in the footnotes. Still, word spread among the right circles. I kept every thank you letter in a locked drawer. Not for pride, but for the days when doubt crept in and whispered that I'd been lucky, not right. Imposter syndrome doesn't vanish just because you cash an 8-figure check. It just dresses nicer, speaks softer, and waits for moments of weakness. The letters reminded me who I was beyond Ethan's shadow. One evening, as I tucked Lily into bed, she looked at me with furrowed brows. "Why do people think dads are always in charge?" she asked. I blinked, surprised by the question. "I guess some people think being louder means being smarter," I said carefully. She nodded, then yawned. "That's silly." After she fell asleep, I opened my laptop and reread the Soterra quarterly report. There was a full-page breakdown of projected applications for my algorithm, now officially referred to as the Langston model. They'd assigned it a 2-year roadmap with international licensing options and cross-sector testing. Projected revenue was already climbing. And nowhere in the report was Ethan's name. Sometimes I imagined him reading those numbers, imagined him realizing that his dismissal hadn't slowed me. It had freed me. That the woman he'd underestimated had quietly become wealthier than his entire former board. But the fantasy faded quickly, replaced by the real satisfaction of quiet control. I didn't need Ethan's recognition. I had built something that required none of his approval. On a Sunday afternoon, Mila called. She'd taken a job at a research lab and sounded happier than I'd ever heard her. She asked if I'd heard about the SEC filing that named Ethan as a subject of inquiry. I hadn't, but I said I'd look into it. She paused, then added, "He's losing friends fast." It was the phrase that stayed with me. Not money, not status, friends. Ethan had been so busy curating influence, he'd forgotten how fragile that loyalty could be. When the tide turned, the men who toasted his speeches disappeared from his contact list. I didn't gloat. I just updated my firewall. One Tuesday morning, I received an email from a name I hadn't seen in years, Carla Chen, my old Caltech roommate. She was now head of a think tank focused on climate analytics and asked if I'd consider collaborating. "Not because of the press," she wrote, "but because you were always 3 moves ahead, and now people are finally catching up." I stared at the message for a long time before replying. Yes, I would help. Working with Carla brought something back I hadn't realized I'd missed. Pure problem solving, no politics, no pitch decks, just hard questions and elegant solutions. Our meetings were full of equations, whiteboard sketches, and late-night debates about statistical models. For the first time in years, I wasn't just protecting or reacting. I was building again, and I felt like myself. When I told Lily I was working with someone from college, she asked if that meant I had homework. I laughed and said yes, but the fun kind. She offered to help and brought me a pencil with a glittery dinosaur topper. "This is for good ideas only," she said solemnly. I used it during my next Zoom call with Carla. May arrived with longer days and blooming cherry blossoms outside our apartment window. We planted a tomato plant on the fire escape and named it Herbert. Lily said he looked hopeful. I agreed. He was already growing faster than expected. In early June, I received a request to speak at a high school graduation. It was the same school Ethan and I had once toured for Lily's future, back when we still pretended we were aligned. They'd read about my work in a local entrepreneur roundup and wanted a keynote on resilience in innovation. I almost declined. But then I thought of Lily, of Sparky, of the girls with garage-built dreams. I stood on the gymnasium stage in a navy blazer and jeans. No podium, just a mic. I didn't talk about money or revenge or failure in the dramatic sense. I talked about underestimation and the quiet violence of being overlooked. I told them how sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is keep building anyway. And then I told them to bet on the person no one sees coming. When I stepped off the stage, a student in a blue cap ran up to me. He introduced himself as Oliver, valedictorian and robotics team captain, hands trembling around a folded piece of paper. "I watched your Soterra talk online," he said. "It made me believe maybe I don't have to wait to be taken seriously." I shook his hand and said, "You don't. Just don't ask for permission no one has the right to give." Driving home, I passed the park where Ethan once took Lily to ride her first tricycle. The same bench was still there, faded and rusted along the edges, but the path was empty. The memory came without sting. just a moment captured in amber, unchanged by everything that followed. Grief, I'd learned, doesn't always scream. Sometimes it just whispers that you're not who you were. Back at the apartment, Lily was wearing her CEO cape, a blanket clipped to her shoulders with binder clips. She informed me that Sparky was now vice president of Big Ideas and had discovered chocolate should be a daily requirement. I made us popcorn, and we sat on the floor drawing blueprints for their next invention, a dream catcher that translated nightmares into storybooks. She asked if she could bring it to school, and I said yes, as long as it didn't involve glitter explosions like last time. She promised it would only sparkle a little. 2 days later, I received a subpoena. It arrived via courier, thick envelope bearing the U.S. government seal, my name typed with precision across the top. The Department of Justice was formally investigating Ethan for financial misconduct and securities fraud. They were seeking testimony related to his tenure at Synexus, including internal dynamics, prior warnings, and possible concealment of financial irregularities. Simone called within minutes of receiving her own copy. "This is serious," she said, not out of panic, but from the depth of her experience. "You're not a target. You're a witness, but you need to be meticulous. I already had every calendar, invite, memo, and access record archived from my time there." Ethan had always prided himself on transparency, but only because he assumed no one was watching. I had watched everything. We met with the DOJ in a conference room lined with water pitchers and stiff chairs. The lead attorney, a calm woman named Rivera, asked questions with surgical precision. What did I know about Ethan's expenditures? DOJ. How involved was he in departmental budgets? DOJ. Had I ever witnessed attempts to move funds off the books? I answered honestly. I hadn't seen the fraud, but I had seen the setup. The way Ethan pushed for sole control over procurement, how he insisted finance approvals go through him for efficiency, how he blocked budget reviews from the board during high-stakes quarters, and how he shut down my attempts to open a shared auditing platform. Rivera nodded, taking notes without revealing reaction. After 3 hours, we wrapped. Rivera thanked me and said they'd be in touch if they needed follow-up. As we left the building, Simone handed me a protein bar from her purse and said, "That was brutal, but you were flawless." I nodded, too tired to feel relief. Testifying hadn't reopened wounds. It had just confirmed they were real. That evening, Mila called to check in. She'd testified the week before, recounting the hush-hush bonuses and the memo Ethan made her write. "Do you think he knew it would come to this?" she asked. I paused before answering. He thought he'd always be the exception, that the rules were written for other people. Ethan still hadn't reached out. Not to me, not to Lily, not even through legal channels. His silence had taken on a weight of its own, not avoidance, but irrelevance. There was no story left for him to control, no performance to polish. Even his LinkedIn profile was gone now, replaced by a page not found error. He disappeared from the internet the way people do when they're preparing for a courtroom, not a comeback. The news broke 2 weeks later. Federal charges filed against former Synexus CEO. The charges included wire fraud, obstruction, and conspiracy to misrepresent quarterly earnings. The press had a field day, dragging up old interviews where Ethan spoke about radical integrity and founder-driven accountability. Stock photos of him smiling in suits appeared beside headlines filled with words like indictment and scandal. I didn't share the articles. I just saved one for Lily's memory box. When the trial was announced, Simone asked if I wanted to attend. "No," I said. "Let him explain himself to strangers." I didn't need to watch him try to recast his downfall as complexity. That was always Ethan's escape route. Call it nuance when the truth was just greed. I had better things to do. The Langston Forward Fund received triple the usual number of proposals that month. Young women, especially women of color, were citing the Ava model as inspiration. Someone had created a podcast about the fund's anonymous grant process, calling it Revenge by Reinvention. I didn't correct the title, though revenge had never been the goal. Freedom had been, and freedom delivered more quietly than any scandal ever could. I took Lily to visit my mother for the weekend, driving down to the coast in a rented hybrid. She made pasta while Lily helped shape meatballs with too much oregano. After dinner, my mother and I sat on the porch watching the sea. She handed me a glass of wine and said, "I'm proud of how you held your silence until it turned into something stronger than noise." I didn't answer out loud, but I squeezed her hand. That night, as I tucked Lily into the guest room bed, she whispered, "Will Daddy go to jail?" Her eyes were wide, not afraid, just trying to understand. "I don't know," I said softly. "That's for other people to decide." She nodded, rolled over, and said, "Okay. Can I still be CEO tomorrow?" I smiled and kissed her forehead. "Forever." Back in the city, summer arrived with the kind of heat that stuck to your skin. Lily insisted Herbert the tomato plant needed an umbrella, so we fashioned one out of cardboard and string. Every morning we checked on his progress like he was a family member, charting his growth on a sticky note by the kitchen window. She said, "When he's ready, we'll make the best sauce ever." I said, "Only if Sparky approves the recipe." One afternoon, I received a letter, not an email, not a typed note, but an actual handwritten envelope with my name in tight cursive. The return address was a correctional facility in upstate New York. Inside was a short, uneven letter from Ethan. It didn't mention the trial, the charges, or the company. It simply read, "Tell Lily I'm sorry I wasn't better. I hope she becomes everything I wasn't brave enough to be." I didn't show Lily the letter. She hadn't asked about him again since that night at my mother's. I folded it, placed it in a plain folder marked "For Later," and slid it into the back of a locked drawer. There was no rage left in me, but there was no reconciliation either. Some bridges weren't burned. They were never built right to begin with. Simone updated me weekly about the case, which now looked more like a formality than a battle. Ethan had taken a plea deal, one that minimized his sentence in exchange for full cooperation and financial restitution. There was talk of probation, restricted travel, and a lifetime ban from holding executive positions. His lawyers argued he was a first-time offender with emotional blind spots. The irony was almost poetic. I didn't follow the trial beyond the basics. The media moved on to flashier tech collapses, louder scandals, and billionaires behaving badly. Ethan's name became a cautionary tale in investor meetings and founder retreats, rarely spoken but deeply understood. His legacy had crumbled in under a year. The man who once smirked at my silence had been undone by his own noise. Meanwhile, the Langston Fund had its first real win in the public eye. The mother-daughter duo we'd backed launched their app with a regional hospital network, gaining press coverage for innovation in accessibility. They credited a grant from a quiet fund that believed in us when no one else did. I smiled when I read the article. The reporter asked to name the fund manager, and they declined, just as we'd agreed. Carla and I submitted a joint paper to an academic journal focused on ethical AI modeling. It was accepted with minor revisions, and for the first time in years, I saw my name on a published research paper again. Ava Langston. No footnotes, no asterisks, no mention of being someone's ex-wife or failed executive. Just a scientist, standing on her own merit. Lily celebrated by drawing me a gold medal that said #1 data boss. She hung it on the fridge next to her glitter robot and Herbert's latest growth chart. We made spaghetti that night with 2 tiny tomatoes and pretended it was a feast for queens. She wore a tiara made of aluminum foil and declared, "This dinner is for people who never gave up." I raised my glass of sparkling water and said, "Then it's perfect." Autumn brought a new rhythm. School for Lily, consulting work for me, and a growing community of founders seeking quiet backing. I hosted a roundtable for women in early-stage tech at a co-working space with creaky floors and exposed brick. There were no panels, no name tags, just people sharing real questions and honest failures. By the end of the night, 10 new collaborations had been born over paper cups of lukewarm tea. I went home smiling, smelling faintly of whiteboard markers and roasted chickpeas. One night in October, Mila showed up at my door with a bottle of wine and a bag of Thai takeout. We hadn't seen each other in months, but she looked grounded, her hair longer, her laughter easier. "I start next week as Director of Ethics at Neuronet," she said, unpacking food onto my counter. "They said they wanted someone who knows what going wrong looks like from the inside." I said, "Then they picked the right person." We sat on the floor, eating noodles, Lily asleep in the next room. Mila hesitated, then asked, "Do you think he ever loved you?" I didn't flinch. "I think he loved being believed in," I said. And I gave him that until I stopped. Mila nodded slowly, her eyes shining but steady. Later, after she left, I opened my laptop and checked the Langston Fund dashboard. There were 12 new applications, each one filled with urgency and unpolished brilliance. I flagged 6 for deeper review and made notes on partnerships, connections, people who could help these women build. It didn't feel like charity. It felt like balance. Like writing something that had tilted too long in the wrong direction. The next morning, Lily woke up with wild bed hair and a dream she couldn't quite explain. It was like flying, but underwater, she said. And there were lights that made music. I told her to draw it before it disappeared. She handed me the paper 20 minutes later and said, "This is what it looked like inside my head." I put it on the fridge, right next to the gold medal. In November, I was invited to deliver a keynote at a Women in AI conference in Toronto. This time, I said yes. I stood in a room of over 1,000 people and spoke about silence as power, about not needing to shout to lead. I didn't mention Ethan. I didn't need to. I ended the talk with a photo, not of me, not of Soterra, but of Lily in her cape beside Sparky. The slide read, "Build something that protects your dreams, even when no one else does." The room rose in applause, not because the words were dramatic, but because they were true. As I stepped off the stage, I thought of Nana, Simone, Carla, Mila, and every woman I had ever backed, and I knew the best was still ahead. Toronto was colder than I expected, the kind of chill that clung to your fingertips long after you'd gone inside. But the conference energy was electric, rooms packed with engineers, researchers, and founders who spoke in acronyms and urgency. After my talk, I was surrounded by women asking about the Langston Fund, each story a variation on the same theme. I've been passed over. I've been told to wait my turn. I stayed up late that night responding to emails from 2 PhD students, a mother of twins with a wearable prototype, and a team of 3 working on an AI that translated dialects in real time. All of them building, all of them invisible to the usual gatekeepers. I didn't offer them exposure. I offered belief backed by capital. And belief, I'd learned, changes everything. When I returned home, Lily greeted me in full cape and tiara regalia. She'd left a CEO checklist on the table with items like think big, be nice, and eat pancakes. Sparky had a new painted upgrade too, a glitter circuit board taped to his chest. I added brain power, she explained. It makes him extra good at saying no to bad deals. I laughed, then made us pancakes for dinner. We sat on the floor with syrupy fingers, watching cartoons while she told me about her new school project, building a marble maze out of cereal boxes. "You have to design it backwards first," she said, "so you know where the marble ends up." Her words lodged in my chest. That was everything I had done. Designed my life backwards from freedom. Later that week, I had a check-in with Carla. Our academic paper had sparked conversations at Stanford and ETH Zurich, and now we'd been asked to join an ethics consortium. Carla said they want us to draft a framework for AI transparency legislation. Quiet power's having a moment. I smiled and said, "Let's make it last longer than a moment." We agreed to meet in D.C. next quarter. That same day, Simone called. Her voice was calm but firm. "You've been subpoenaed again. Civil suit this time. A class action against Synexus shareholders." I sat down slowly, breath steady. "Ethan?" I asked. "Not directly," she said, "but he's part of it. The plaintiffs want to establish a pattern of executive negligence. My name was on early filings as a former officer and whistleblower. I'd be asked to testify, this time not about Ethan, but about the culture that enabled him. The paper trail would do most of the talking. We reviewed everything together. Old board meeting minutes, emails where I'd questioned budgets, records of rejected oversight suggestions. Simone built a timeline so tight it could cut glass. At the end, she looked at me and said, "You don't have to do this if it feels like reopening a wound." I answered without hesitation. "It's not a wound anymore. It's evidence." The deposition was held in a sterile law office with 2 white walls and water bottles arranged like soldiers. Opposing counsel tried to rattle me, asked if I'd acted out of professional jealousy after being removed. I kept my tone measured. My exit wasn't a betrayal. It was a beginning. One that prevented me from being part of the damage you're now trying to quantify. They asked about Ethan. I spoke only about the systems, the incentives, the cracks that let someone like him operate without consequence. I mentioned the culture of condescension, the gendered jokes at investor dinners, the way decisions were made behind closed doors. I didn't paint myself as a victim. I let the truth stand by itself. When it was over, Simone squeezed my shoulder. "You just closed a loop," she said, and she was right. I had walked through every room Ethan once controlled and turned off the lights behind me. There was nothing left there to haunt me. The next morning, Lily asked what a deposition was. I explained it the simplest way I could. It's when someone asks questions to understand what happened, so mistakes don't happen again. She thought for a minute. Like when we figure out why the marble got stuck in the maze? Exactly, I said, and then we fix it. In December, I took Lily to visit Caltech. It was quiet, mostly empty for winter break. But I wanted her to see the place where her mom once chased ideas in empty labs. She held my hand tightly and said, "It smells like smart people." I told her that once. I'd slept under my desk here for 3 days while debugging a neural net. She asked, "Did anyone bring you cookies?" We walked past the building where I'd filed the original provisional patent. The bench I used to eat peanut butter sandwiches on was still there, though the wood had faded. I sat for a moment, Lily beside me, and watched the sun creep over the physics department rooftop. I didn't feel like a returning hero, just someone who'd finally made peace with where it all began, and where it nearly ended. The Langston Forward Fund hit 50 grantees by year's end. Simone hosted a celebration at a rented hall with string lights and a jazz trio. There was no press, no influencers, no branding, just food, laughter, and women sharing what they'd built. Each woman wore a sticker that said, "Still building." It was the only label that ever mattered. At the end of the night, I stood beside Carla and Mila, watching a robotics demo from one of our earliest grantees. The bot's voice stuttered, then corrected itself with a charming, "Oops, recalculating." Mila grinned and said, "I've heard VCs do worse." Carla nudged me and whispered, "You've made something permanent now. It's not just a fund, it's a future." And for once, I believed her without hesitation. Back at home, Lily was already asleep, clutching Sparky like he was a bodyguard. Her cape was folded on the floor beside the gold medal and a new drawing of me labeled "Boss of Bright Ideas." I stood there for a long time, heart full in the quiet. Then I whispered, "Thank you." Not to anyone in particular, but to the long line of choices that had led us here, and to the woman I had become when I stopped waiting for permission. January brought snow and a stillness I hadn't felt in years. The city quieted under a white blanket, and even the bakery downstairs opened late. Lily insisted we build a snow lab in the courtyard, complete with a tunnel system and marble experiments that ended in hot cocoa. We made a snow Sparky, too, giving him stick arms and bottle cap eyes. She said, "He's here to supervise the weather." One morning, while Lily was at school, I sat at my desk reviewing grant reports when my phone buzzed. It was Simone, and her voice came through softer than usual. "The class action settled," she said. "Synexus will pay $74 million in damages. Ethan won't be named personally, but his misconduct is cited in the findings." I didn't feel triumph, just finality, a chapter gently closing, pages worn at the edges but no longer burning. Simone continued, "Your deposition played a key role. Several board members privately acknowledged it was overdue." I thanked her and hung up, then opened a folder labeled Old World. Inside were scanned contracts, patent filings, emails from the early Synexus years, receipts I no longer needed to hold. I uploaded copies to an encrypted drive, then deleted the originals, not to erase the past, but to stop carrying it in my pocket. Some things deserve to be archived, not clung to. Later that evening, Lily and I made paper lanterns for Lunar New Year. She insisted each one contain a secret wish, rolled up inside and taped discreetly beneath the rim. I asked if she'd tell me hers, and she shook her head. "It won't work if I say it out loud," she said, "but I'll tell you after it comes true." I smiled. and wrote mine quietly. Keep building, even when it's hard. The Langston Fund received its first major endowment offer that month. A philanthropic collective wanted to match our next 5 grants and offered full discretion on deployment. Their letter praised our model as the most trust-forward structure they'd seen. Simone reviewed the paperwork and said, "They're trying to be where the current is going." I said, "Good. Let's make sure we keep rowing." I flew to D.C. for a closed-door policy session on ethical machine learning standards. Carla led the session, her notes covered in color-coded tabs, her voice sharp with conviction. Across the room sat industry leaders who once dismissed our ideas as niche. Now they took notes, asked questions, and nodded slowly when we laid out audit paths and data dignity clauses. It felt like being heard in a language we'd invented years ago. Afterward, we sat at a tiny cafe with cold sandwiches and warm coffee. Carla asked if I ever thought about teaching again. "Sometimes," I admitted, "but I don't miss the institutions. I miss the students who don't know how brilliant they are yet." She raised her cup, "To the ones still coming." Spring arrived early. Herbert came back to life, and Lily decided he needed a sibling. We planted a new tomato next to him and named it Sylvia, so they could talk when we're asleep. She drew up a care chart and assigned us alternating watering duties. I joked we were now in the agriculture sector. She deadpanned, "We're building edible data." In April, I finally replied to Ethan's letter. Not for him, he wouldn't receive it, but for me. I wrote it on real paper, no digital trace, no signature. "You were wrong when you said failure was in my blood. You just couldn't recognize a different kind of success." I folded the letter and placed it in Lily's memory box, behind her gold medal and a printout of our first Soterra press release. One day, when she was older and asked real questions, I'd give her the full story, not to poison her view of her father, but to show her what silence can build when used with care. To remind her she came from a line of women who bet on themselves, and won. By summer, the Langston Fund had surpassed 100 funded ventures. We quietly launched a founders retreat. No stage, no agenda, just a space for rest and recalibration. Mila facilitated one of the sessions, leading a workshop called "Saying No Without Explaining Yourself." Afterward, someone asked me if I'd ever go public with the fund's origin. I answered honestly, "If the story helps others, sure." But it was never about the story. One night, I found Lily drawing on the balcony with a flashlight tucked under her chin like a spotlight. She showed me a sketch titled Dream Lab, complete with walls made of recycled glass and floating cloud desks. "Can we build this someday?" she asked. I kissed the top of her head and said, "We're already starting," and I meant it. August brought the 10-year anniversary of Synexus founding. A tech blog published a retrospective titled The Rise and Fall of a Startup Darling. Ethan's name appeared twice, once in the context of the settlement, once in a quote from a former colleague who said, "He bet against the wrong co-founder." I didn't repost the article or comment. Some stories finished themselves. That weekend, we had 3 founders over for brunch, 2 from Chicago, 1 from Lagos. They were in town for a demo day, all 3 funded in the last round, all bootstrapping and blazing. We served pancakes and strawberries, and Lily passed out stickers that said, "Still building." I watched them laugh, share code, compare rejection stories, and trade ideas over second helpings, and I felt something deeper than pride, legacy. That night, Lily asked if she could be in charge of the fund when she was older. I told her she didn't have to be in charge to make something matter. She nodded, then added, "But I want to help people the way you do." "You already do," I whispered, pulling the blanket up to her chin. She fell asleep holding a printout of her Dream Lab drawing. I stayed up late at my desk, the window open, warm air brushing my cheeks. The city glowed quietly, headlights sweeping streets, conversations floating from stoops, a world still humming. I thought of every woman who'd emailed me a pitch, every late-night Zoom where brilliance bloomed without apology. And I thought of Ethan, somewhere far from this rhythm, still rewriting the past while I invested in the future. My future, our future, one funded, built, and written entirely on my terms. Thank you for listening to Ava story. If you're yet to subscribe, please consider doing so before watching another story on the channel.